Without answering your question directly, let me just say that when you spend 14 hours a day with someone over a period of 5 years, it is probably, I probably will never spend 14 hours a day with any man in my life.
For decades, Stefanie Powers has been pulled into one of Hollywood's most controversial conversations. To many, Robert Wagner is a name that comes with unanswered questions and long-running speculation about Natalie Wood's death. And Stefanie Powers has often been placed right beside that story, as someone who knew him long before everything. But what makes her case unusual is this: she never played the role people expected her to play. So why has her name been tied to one of Hollywood's most controversial cases for so long? And what did she actually say that keeps frustrating both critics and believers alike? The friendship before the tragedy. When ABC was casting Heart to Heart in 1979, executives originally considered several other actresses for the role of Jennifer Hart, including Robert's own wife at the time, Natalie Wood. The studio ultimately passed on that idea, partly out of a belief that audiences would not want to watch a real married couple play a married couple on screen. Robert pushed for Stefanie instead, even though the studio initially doubted she had the right comic touch for the part. He had worked with her years earlier on It Takes a Thief, and believed in the chemistry they already had. He later told Closer magazine that the partnership worked because the two of them simply had a joyous time together on set, never anything more than that. The show ran from 1979 to 1984, turned both of them into household names, and built a friendship that would end up surviving far more than either of them could have predicted when the cameras first rolled. Stefanie has talked about that early chemistry many times since, describing the show as something that took a while to find its audience before turning into a genuine phenomenon. She recalled the moment the show's success became impossible to ignore, telling Fox News Digital that she remembered the screams from fans when she and Robert won the People's Choice Award in 1980, and the two of them suddenly realized just how much the audience had taken to them. That kind of detail, small, specific, and a little sentimental, runs through nearly every interview she has ever given about her years working alongside Wagner, long before any of it became tangled up in true crime coverage. Their bond extended beyond the show's writer's room, too. Lionel Stander, who played the Hart's loyal butler Max on the series, became a father figure to Robert during their years working together, according to Stander's daughter, Jennifer, who has said Robert showed up for every major moment in her life afterward. That kind of detail paints a picture of a cast that genuinely functioned like an extended family behind the scenes, which makes the timing of what happened just 2 years into the show's run feel even more disorienting in hindsight. Nobody involved in that casting room in 1979 had any idea what was coming just 2 years later, when both of their personal lives would collapse within 18 days of each other. So, what exactly happened that turned their lives upside down? The same November. On November 12, 1981, William Holden, Stefanie Powers' partner of nearly a decade, died after a fall in his home. He was 63. 17 days later, on November 29th, Natalie Wood drowned off the coast of Catalina Island while on a boat trip with Robert, actor Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain. She was 43. Stefanie and Robert, who were already mid-production on a hit television series together, found themselves grieving the two most important people in their lives within the same few weeks, while still showing up to the same soundstage every day. Stefanie told Fox News Digital in 2024 that she and Robert leaned on each other for support during that period, and that both of them understood they had a commitment to the show that had to continue regardless of what they were going through privately. She described it as a complicated and difficult time, made harder by the fact that Wagner also had young daughters from his marriage to Wood, who needed him to keep functioning as a parent in the middle of his own grief. Stefanie later channeled her grief over Holden into something tangible rather than letting it stay private. She founded the William Holden Wildlife Foundation in his honor, an organization built around educating young people on conservation and habitat preservation, work that has continued for decades and has reportedly reached thousands of students. In 2024, she was honored as one of 25 recipients of the Agents of Change Award at a luncheon held at the United Nations, recognition tied directly to the foundation she built out of that 1981 loss. Robert, for his part, continued raising the two young daughters he shared with Natalie Wood, while also stepping into a role as stepfather to Natasha, Natalie's daughter, from her first marriage. That shared loss is the foundation of everything that came afterward between them, and it is also the reason headlines have spent years trying to position Stefanie as a key witness to a mystery she actually had no part in creating. So, to the most obvious question, what did this shared tragedy spark between Stefanie and Robert? Long before anyone called it finally. The framing of Stefanie as someone who has just now decided to speak out doesn't hold up against the actual record. She has talked about Wagner and Natalie Wood's death in interviews stretching back well over a decade, consistently, without much variation in what she says. In a 2019 conversation with Fox News, she directly addressed the ongoing speculation around Natalie Wood's death, acknowledging plainly that she was aware it continued to follow Robert. She has given some version of the same answer in nearly every major interview since, including a lengthy 2019 conversation with journalist Tim Tiemann and a 2024 sit-down timed to the anniversary of Holden and Natalie's deaths. What she has never done is suggest that she believes Robert had anything to do with his wife's death. Robert has never relied on friends like Stefanie to speak for him. He addressed the speculation directly in his own 2009 memoir, Pieces of My Heart, publicly denying any involvement in his wife's death years before the case was even reopened. That denial has remained consistent across every subsequent interview and public appearance, including the 2024 Hulu-style press rounds tied to heart-to-heart anniversary coverage, where he continued describing the night on the Splendor in the same terms he used in his book. What makes Robert's position harder to simply accept at face value, according to investigators, is the way his account has shifted in small details over more than 4 decades. The boat's captain, Dennis Davern, told investigators he heard Natalie and Robert arguing the night she disappeared. Robert Wagner's own written account placed the argument between himself and Christopher Walken instead, and described not noticing his wife was missing until he realized the small dinghy tied to the yacht was also gone. Those are not necessarily irreconcilable accounts of a chaotic night, but they are exactly the kind of inconsistency that kept investigators describing his story as not adding up, even as Robert himself never wavered from insisting he had nothing to hide. Christopher Walken, the third adult on the boat that night, took a different approach than Robert when the case was reopened. He met with investigators directly when they came calling, and was never named a person of interest the way Robert was. That distinction, one man cooperating fully and avoiding suspicion, the other limiting his contact with detectives and absorbing decades of scrutiny as a result, is part of what kept the case alive in headlines for as long as it stayed alive at all. None of this involved Stefanie Powers in any direct way. She was not a witness or interviewed by detectives working the case. She was, throughout all of it, simply the person closest to Robert who kept being asked to comment on a situation she had no first-hand knowledge of, and who kept giving variations of the same careful answer, instead of speculating about things she could not possibly know. But what happened when the investigation itself started changing, and the man Stefanie Powers kept defending found himself at the center of renewed scrutiny. The person of interest years. The case around Natalie Wood's death did not stay still, while Stefanie kept giving the same calm answer in interview after interview. Investigators reopened the case in 2011, and in 2018, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Lieutenant John Carini told CBS's 48 Hours that Wagner had become more of a person of interest as the years of investigation went on. Carini told correspondent Erin Moriarty that Robert was the last person known to be with Natalie Wood before she disappeared, and stated that Robert's account of that night had changed over time in ways that didn't fully match what other witnesses had described. The accusations grew louder from inside Natalie Wood's own family during the same period. Natalie Wood's sister, Lana Wood, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern, both publicly suggested Wagner had not been fully honest with investigators about what happened that night. Robert Wagner's representative responded forcefully, calling Lana Wood and Davern despicable human beings who were capitalizing on the accidental death of a member of the Wagner family, and saying they should be ashamed of themselves. The autopsy report itself added another more speculation. Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Detective Ralph Hernandez told 48 Hours that the report showed a number of bruises on Natalie Wood's body that appeared fresh, describing her injuries as making her look like the victim of an assault rather than someone who had simply fallen overboard. When correspondent Erin Moriarty asked Lieutenant Carini directly whether he believed Natalie had been murdered, Carini said the circumstances were suspicious enough to make investigators think something had happened, while acknowledging they had also never been able to prove the death was a straightforward accident either. That combination, suspicious enough to keep the case open, not enough to bring a charge, defined the entire decade of renewed investigation that followed. That fight, between Wagner's camp and Natalie's own sister, played out in tabloids and television specials for years. Stefanie, who had every opportunity to weigh in with something sensational of her own, took a very different path. Powers pushes back quietly. When Fox News asked Stefanie directly about the renewed accusations from Lana Wood and Davern in 2019, her response was measured. She said there are people who, whenever they can, try to make some money off selling the story, and added that she was sure it reached Robert. It was the closest thing to a defense of her friend that Stefanie has ever offered on the record, framed as sympathy for what he had to endure rather than as evidence about what actually happened on that boat in 1981. She was not in a position to know what happened on the Splendor that night any more than anyone else outside that boat. What she was in a position to know was what it looked like to watch a friend get dragged through decades of public suspicion while quietly continuing to raise 2 daughters and build a career. And that experience is what she has actually spoken to again and again whenever she's been asked. She has also been careful, in every interview on record, not to attack Lana Wood or Davern personally, the way Wagner's own representative did. Her criticism stayed general, aimed at the broader pattern of people profiting from true crime attention rather than at any specific person by name. The investigation that all of this speculation centered around eventually reached its own quiet conclusion, years after the loudest accusations had already faded from headlines. In 2022, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department announced it had exhausted all leads in Natalie Wood's case, and Robert was no longer considered a person of interest, according to page 6. After more than a decade of renewed investigation, fresh interviews, and an autopsy report that had once been cited as showing fresh bruising on Wood's body, the case did not end in an arrest, a confession, or new charges. It ended the way a huge number of cold cases end, with investigators saying there was nowhere left to go with the evidence they had. For Robert Wagner, It meant living for years under a designation that the investigation itself eventually walked back without fanfare. For Stefanie, it meant that whatever she had quietly believed and quietly said in interviews for years turned out to roughly track where the actual investigation landed. It is worth sitting with how unusual that quiet outcome actually is given how loud the years leading up to it were. A sitting sheriff's lieutenant had gone on national television in 2018 calling Wagner a person of interest and suggesting his story didn't add up. A reopened investigation had spent years re-interviewing witnesses and revisiting an autopsy report that hinted at possible assault. None of that escalation ended in an arrest, a formal accusation, or even a public statement clarifying exactly why the case had finally gone cold. It simply stopped being pursued, and the designation that had hung over Wagner for 4 years quietly disappeared from the conversation around the same time the news cycle moved on to other stories. Robert, who was in his 90s by the time that announcement came down, never publicly celebrated it or framed it as vindication. That muted reaction matched the way he had handled the entire ordeal from the start. Minimal public engagement with the accusations themselves, a brief statement through representatives when things got especially heated, and otherwise a continued steady presence at industry events, family gatherings, and visits with old friends like Powers. What the case's quiet ending did not do was settle the argument inside Wood's own family, where the divide over what really happened has remained sharp for decades. The family that stayed loyal. The strongest public defense of Robert Wagner has never actually come from Stefanie Powers. It has come from inside Wood's own household. Natasha Gregson Wagner, Natalie Wood's daughter from her first marriage, and Robert Wagner's stepdaughter, has spoken at length about her relationship with him, describing him in a 2025 Fox News interview as one of the great loves of her life. She has said publicly that neither she nor Robert believed she would survive the grief of losing her mother, and that he was there for her through it in exactly the way she had always known him to be. That family split, Natasha Gregson Wagner standing firmly behind her stepfather, while her aunt Lana Wood spent years publicly questioning his account, is the actual emotional core of this story, far more than anything Powers has ever said. Gregson Wagner has gone further than simply defending Wagner in passing. She has spoken about how deeply moved she was watching him during difficult moments tied to her mother's memory, describing him as someone whose presence in her life shaped her understanding of who he truly was, not just as a public figure, but as the man who raised her. Where Gregson Wagner's defense carries the emotional weight of a daughter defending the man who raised her, Stefanie's version has always been quieter and more observational. The perspective of someone who simply never saw anything in Robert Wagner's character over 50 years of friendship that matched the picture painted by his harshest critics. That consistency is exactly why the framing of finally speaking out falls apart under any real scrutiny. And it's also why the friendship itself has managed to outlast every wave of renewed accusation that has come at Wagner since 2011. In February 2024, Stefanie and Robert reunited to celebrate his 94th birthday, with photos showing her resting a hand on his shoulder, the same easy familiarity that defined their 5 seasons together on Heart to Heart decades earlier. Stefanie has described the relationship in present tense terms, saying the two of them can still push each other's buttons today, and that they laugh all the time. Robert lives in Aspen with his wife, the actress Jill St. John, and the two old co-stars still make a point of reaching out whenever either of them is in Beverly Hills. That is not the behavior pattern of two people sitting on a decades-old secret, nor is it the behavior of someone privately convinced her friend got away with something. It is the behavior of two people in their 80s and 90s who built something real on a television set in 1979. Lost the people they loved most within weeks of each other 2 years later, and simply never stopped checking in on one another afterward. Stefanie has continued working steadily through her 80s as well, far from the picture of someone retreating from public life under the weight of an old controversy. In 2025, she released an updated edition of her memoir, One from the Heart, telling Digital Journal she felt there weren't many people left who had actually lived through the period of Hollywood history she experienced, and that fans had kept asking her to write more. She has continued making public appearances alongside other Golden Age stars, including a widely shared 2026 photo with fellow screen legend Julie Newmar, looking every bit the working actress, rather than someone defined by a decades-old tragedy that wasn't even her own. Whatever Robert Wagner did or did not do on a boat off Catalina Island in 1981 is a question that investigators spent a decade trying and failing to fully answer. It was never a question Stefanie Powers' friendship was ever built to resolve in the first place. Do you think the real story here is more interesting than the headline made it sound? And what do you make of a friendship that's lasted through everything Wagner and Powers have both been through? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.